let's try that. All right, that's good. So everyone will need to project and use their big, I'm giving a talk at a conference voices, but I think if we do that, we'll be good to go.
How big was the disco ball?
Oh.
Huge.
It's tiny. No, it was smaller
Hundreds
than the
of
microphone.
millimeters across.
Oh, hundreds. If you go to nanometers, it's even...
From ScienceSortOf.com, you're listening to Science Sort of.
Science Sort of. You're listening to episode 305. I'm your host, Ryan, and joining me to talk about things that are science, things that are sort of science, and things that wish they were science around the theme of how to train your science.
It's the Joe and Abe Show.
Woo! Joe and Abe are back. They didn't even need me to introduce them. They're taking over. They're turning this into like a morning Zoo Crew radio show.
That is your host, Ryan, speaking.
Clearly, I need to train my co-hosts. I actually remembered to introduce myself ahead of saying, yeah, so it's really just up to me introducing you two, which I've done because I'm here with Abe, woo, and Joe.
Hello. And
this week we are featuring, the whole episode is an interview that, well, Abe, why don't you introduce the interview?
Yeah, so while we were at AGU as press members of the press, we got the chance to interview. Definitely
not feeling like two kids who were just playing dress up with microphones while people from real news organizations were doing their job.
We did interviews.
Is that two kids in one trench coat?
Yes.
Okay, got it. Yep.
we were Vincent Reporter Man.
That's right. I was on top.
I lost the coin flip, Joe. Abe could only be at the meeting for a day, so I had to,
Is his face on the badge?
It was the only day I could show my face.
He got to be on top, but I got to wear the fedora with the little note card stuck in it.
That's true.
Just no one could see it because it was hidden in the trench coat.
Right.
Yeah, so we got to do an interview, a few interviews while we were at AGU, mostly Ryan at AGU as press, but the day that I joined Ryan to help interview, we got the chance to sit down with a group of students and researchers from Scripps Oceanographic Institute.
Yep.
And one of the fun things that just kind of caught our attention is that they took the train from San Diego to attend AGU in Washington, D.C. to raise awareness of lowering your carbon footprint for trips. So yeah.
That was a long train ride.
It is.
I've looked at taking the train from LA to DC because I've always wanted to do that, but man, it's a long ride.
Yeah, so they said, we'll talk about this in the interview, but just before we get into it, they said from sea to shining Potomac, and they had a hashtag trAinGU, so trAinGU, by the numbers, 8 students plus 4 postdocs from Scripps Oceanographic Institute, 3,263.48 miles, 68 hours, 57 stops, 18 books, 12 plus games, 11 states plus DC, 6 posters, and 1 disco ball. So that was... Yeah, so it sounded like it was a really fun thing, and we got to chat to a group of them, and we have them all introduce themselves at the beginning of the interview, so I say we just go to that and let them take over the show.
Let's roll right into it.
We'll break in halfway through with some drinks, and then we'll come back in at the end for our usual nonsense. So see you all in a minute. So rather than have me try to introduce all of you individually, would we mind going around the table and just having you all say who you are? Now you're all from Scripps Institution of Oceanography, but if you could just give us your name and sort of your status and the general area of research you do or the type of scientist you identify as, I think that'll be a good way to get started.
Yeah, I'm Wesley Neely. I'm a fifth-year PhD student at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. I do stuff related to groundwater, a field called hydrogeology, so looking at how the shape of the Earth changes in the hydrosphere.
Great.
My name is Adrian Doran. I'm finishing my PhD at Scripps as well. I self-identify as a seismologist, and I use seismic waves to study the structure of the oceanic crust, which is the Earth underneath the oceans.
I'm Dara Goldberg. I'm a recently graduated PhD at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. I study large earthquakes with traditional seismic instrumentation and also with GPS for the purposes of earthquake early warning and structural hazard monitoring.
I'm Margaret Lindeman. I'm a third-year PhD student at Scripps, and I'm an oceanographer and kind of wannabe glaciologist. So I study ice sheet ocean interactions in Greenland.
Oh, cool. You have the one that has the word that I couldn't pronounce in your abstract. The name of the ice sheet.
Nordhavsfjorden. It's Danish.
What was the problem with that?
Now that you say it, it sounds so
It's
clear.
obvious. Come on.
He's not very well versed in Danish.
I-
Get him up to speed in Icelandic.
He's barely got me saying the name of the volcano in Iceland that keeps going off and wrecking all the air travel, but
I don't even try.
the one volcano that exists in all of Iceland. Yep, that's the one.
Jeez. Oh,
Safe
jeez.
from the wind.
So I want to talk to you guys about both the science that you came here to present, but then also how you got here to present it. So maybe let's just go around the room in the same direction we went originally, and can you tell us a little bit about the research that you were presenting here at AGU? I have your abstracts up if you need them for reference.
Hopefully we remember.
I know sometimes
You might
there's
have forgotten.
significant mission drift between when the abstract gets written and when the presentation happens. So, Wesley, you have the ups and downs of California's Central Valley from GPS-enhanced InSAR. I don't know what InSAR is, though.
Yes, so InSAR is interferometric synthetic aperture radar. So basically, it's this radar satellite that you can use multiple passes of and backtrack how the surface has changed. So you can get a displacement between these two times. And GPS, like in your phone, gives you a positioning. So if you have a position every day, you can also determine what these displacements are. So leveraging these two different data sets to try to understand what's happening in the Central Valley. So my talk is over primarily the large-scale subsidence features in the Central Valley, as well as the seasonal signal associated with groundwater pumping related to agricultural production.
Can you explain?
Wait, so my understanding... Oh, do you have a question?
I was going to ask if you could repeat that in Danish.
Well, I was going to ask if... so it sounds like, if I'm understanding correctly, the amount of water that's getting pumped around California for agriculture is having an effect on subsidence, which I don't have a good working definition of subsidence. Subsidence been a while since
The change in elevation of the general land area.
like how when a glacier retreats, the land bounces back up.
Right.
Okay.
And
That's
so
the
there works
opposite.
two ways. You can extract groundwater and it'll subside, or
Yeah,
if
so
you load water during the winter, snowfall, things like that. Also,
So yeah, you can really think about subsidence or subsidence as the sinking of the surface of the ground. Yeah, so basically in the Central Valley, in these aquifer systems, the groundwater is forcing apart the rock minerals, and when you pump, you reduce the pressure that's forcing those minerals away from each other, and when there's a decrease in this pressure, it's called pore collapse, and basically the minerals just kind of fall like a house of cards and causes this permanent deformation and sinking in the ground. So in Central Valley, it can be upwards of 35 centimeters a year, even. Pretty crazy when you think about, over the course of a few years, you have a meter of change. It has some pretty huge impacts for infrastructure. There's a lot of highways, there's oil production, so you have to have these certain considerations of what's going on. Also, aqueducts that transport vital water from Northern California down to Southern California.
And you're basically able to monitor this from space.
Yes, so we have kind of this unprecedented resolution using InSAR. So GPS gives you it's really, really nice temporally. So you get a measurement like every day, but it's really spread out. It's like tens of kilometers, miles apart from each other. Even in California, where it's the densest part of the network that we have in the US. But InSAR, you can get it up to 100 meters or finer resolution. So I can see things like individual farms sinking due to their own water practices.
Wow.
So
like if you're on a farm and you're like pumping up water for your almond trees, you're actually sinking your own farm slowly but surely.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of an interesting thing about that. I'm on another presentation here. We've been working with a group at the School of Global Policy and Strategy at UCSD, University of California, San Diego. And they were actually looking at these relations between subsidence and crop types, and also human behavior of like switching from year to year. And what we found is that even though we have this kind of idea in our head that almonds are super water intensive, they're actually not as bad as some of the other crops because of the enhanced irrigation practices. So even though it takes more water to grow a single almond, they have much more efficient ways of irrigating than
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it comes down to both crop type and technology that you
Yes, yeah.
Also, any of you
systems.
are welcome to jump in if you have questions and want to press.
So what did you find that is worse, for example, for water usage than almonds?
Basically anything that they just flood the fields. So I think various like truck crops or something. It's not my specialty, but so like tomatoes and things like that.
So next time you eat a tomato, think about that.
I know.
They're out of season right now.
You'll feel good the next time you eat almonds.
Well, exactly.
Nothing you eat is sustainable anymore. So
Thinking of that too.
This took a turn. So, Adrian, can you tell us a little bit about lateral heterogeneity of the upper oceanic lithosphere surrounding Hawaii? So
I would love to.
When people have titles like this, the first thing we do is we hold their feet to the fire and we say, can you say that in plain English?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Or
Danish. Well,
but he doesn't want to.
I would like to, but so I study the way seismic energy moves to the Earth. So anytime anything happens on the Earth, for example, an earthquake, or for example, oceans move like tides, energy is transmitted through the Earth through seismic waves. And I use these to study what the actual rocks of the Earth are composed of and the structure of the rocks within the Earth, and according to that title, how these properties of rocks change as you go in different locations of the Earth. So I've had 2 presentations at AGU this year. The one that you just referenced was about trying to image, which means understand the properties of Hawaii. So we're looking at the volcano in Hawaii and how deep it begins and where the magma comes from. And I'm also looking at a volcano offshore Washington State. There's one of the largest volcanoes in the world is there, but it's under the ocean, and it has very regular eruptions. And with new instruments that have recently been put there by NSF through a big project called OOI, which is Oceans Observatories Initiative, we have very long record of data, and we can look at changes in the very deepest plumbing of the volcano, which has been really interesting because the data we have spans an eruption, and you can see very large changes in how the magma is transported and what speed it's transported at, and so we can better understand volcanoes that way.
So when you talk about it being lateral, like I tend to think of stuff happening in the deep part of the crust as being more up and down focused, but I don't tend to think of it in terms of like lateral shifting. So what's the distinction?
Right. So lateral, or you could say geographic. So as you change your position on the Earth, what is happening beneath you could change. So one of the questions about Hawaii, which is my main project here, is where the magma actually comes from. So we think it comes from very deep in the Earth, like from potentially the core mantle boundary, which is about half the way into the Earth, so 3,000 kilometers approximately. But we don't know that for sure, and it could also come from very shallow in the Earth, and it's been very difficult for seismologists to image where this plume is actually coming from. And so some images, for example, think that the plume comes from beneath islands like Maui and Oahu and then moves over onto the Big Island, and some people think it begins right under the Big Island. And it matters because it determines how much material is coming and, for example, where the next eruptions will be occurring. And so we're trying to figure out, so when I say lateral heterogeneity, it's really focusing on how things change as a function of your position.
And so when you're looking, say, for example, at the Big Island, Hawaii, and if we take the example of Kilauea volcano, what do you see as you move away from, because we can think of it as on the surface, we very definitely have a center of activity, and that's what we try to define as this is the volcano. So how does that change when you start looking down?
Right. So what some of our preliminary research shows is that it might be connected with some other regions, and we're trying to image where exactly the melt is coming from. So is it sourced from a very large area? Is it a very narrow tube that connects right to the lowermost mantle? And this is important because we know that the chemistry of these rocks on Hawaii is very different from the chemistry of other volcanoes and of other islands. And so we're trying to figure out how the chemistry can be explained by where the melt is coming from, and vice versa, how the chemistry can inform us of where to look.
Yeah, see, I definitely just thought that it was a straight plume. I didn't realize that it was that there was even an option that it could have twists.
Yeah, well, that's the latest and greatest in volcanology. So
one of the things that complicates trying to understand it is that we have moving parts on top of that.
And there's a crust in the way.
And there's a crust in the way of trying to get there. And so my background is looking at volcanoes in Iceland. It's really nice because things are just happening there, and the crust is moving away, and so it creates a record that kind of moves out of the way as the ocean ridge spreads, and it preserves that record in a different way, whereas in Hawaii we have a plume that's trying to pump some energy, which results in magmatism and the volcanism on the surface, but it's trying to do so through a moving crust.
Right.
Which creates different dynamics than in Iceland, where it's more or less in place.
Yeah.
So that might be more of a vertical structure where it can just pump magma up from wherever its source, whether it's at the core mantle boundary or not, and then melt its way into the surface because it doesn't have to fight.
That makes sense with now the lateral part of it makes more sense.
Right.
To me. No, please.
I was going to say, so like I mentioned, the melt might be coming from under Oahu or something. So as the plate is moving over the hotspot, it's potentially dragging the top of the plume with it to the west. And so we're trying to figure out how does the melt come up and move over and come back, or is it sort of just one large chamber that it's then sourced from? Or there is a small but very vocal minority of scientists with some good reason that do not think a plume is necessary at all. So from what we understand of whole Earth convection in the mantle, it's not strictly required that there be plumes. So it would be, to have a plume would be in some senses unexpected. So some researchers try to explain everything you can see at Hawaii with just differences in melt in the very top of the lithosphere, which is the uppermost 50 kilometers of the Earth. And so what we're trying to do is definitively image whether or not the plume is there.
And when you say image, but you're using seismic data, so I think seismic, I think of like listening, like you're using audio waves essentially, or seismic waves. So how does that translate into an image?
Right. So that's a great question. So we know that waves move in different speeds through the Earth depending on what the material is. And so what we're measuring is essentially differences in travel time. So if a seismic wave arrives faster than you expect, that means it's been through faster and typically more dense. And around Hawaii, what we often look for is slower than expected, because if something is, maybe you would intuit this or not, but if it moves through a hot material, it moves slower. And if it moves through, there's magma in the material, because it's fluid, that moves slower as well. So we're looking for any we call them signatures of hot material or melted material, which would be defined by the energy arriving slower than you would expect. And that would be, as it travels from anywhere on the Earth to our instruments around Hawaii, it would pass through that material, and so it would be slowed down by it. And that's how we think we see.
You're essentially trying to map all of the spaces where your signal slows down. Exactly.
And if that corresponds with a tube underneath Hawaii, then we could claim that we, with 100% confidence, not only that, but that we have imaged some sort of plume. And if it doesn't seem there's anything there, then we say, okay, maybe it's not a plume.
I was just going to say, in terms of listening to the Earth, like you should actually listen to his data, because he's been able to make an audio file out of some of it.
Can you send me a clip to use?
I could, yeah. It's very exciting. It's not really to do with a plume, but it is to do with, on OBS, you often record other signals that you didn't expect. So, ocean bottom seismometer. So these are the instruments we use. They're placed in the bottom of the ocean, sometimes as deep as 6,000 meters or more. So around Hawaii, the ocean is very deep. So we put them down there. And you often, even though we're looking for earthquake signals, you can pick up other signals. For example, we hear lots and lots of whale calls. And so we've compressed and altered the files a little bit, but then you can hear the whales singing on your instruments. And it's really cool.
So, Dara, speaking of sensors, you took a multi-sensor natural hazard structural monitoring approach at the UC San Diego's Geisel? Geisel Library. So can you tell us about that?
Well, Geisel after Theodore Geisel, who's Dr. Seuss. So it's
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so our library is named after him. He has a San Diego connection.
And you didn't write your abstract in Seussian verse?
I didn't, but I have to say I did start my presentation in Seussian verse, and I only got a few stanzas in and then decided maybe that wasn't the professional approach.
There's a new Grinch movie out this right around now anyway. There's lots of, it's in the zeitgeist again, right?
Yeah, so while I was working with that, maybe we can come back to this later instead. So I got through about half of my presentation in Seussian verse and then decided against it. I'm looking for jobs here and I didn't want to.
That's fair.
Yeah, so...
That is one good way to stand out.
Yeah.
It's true. I might regret it. But instead, we refocused our efforts and wrote a Seussian-style poem about our train trip instead.
Oh,
so
great. We'll come back to that for
we
sure.
can come back to that later. Yeah, so this abstract that I'm presenting here is actually kind of a departure from the majority of my PhD research, but we're doing a collaboration with a group of engineers at UC San Diego and trying to figure out how we can devise a data-driven approach to structural hazard monitoring for campus buildings, because the university is, of course, responsible for student safety in its buildings, and the way that they check for building stability now is visual inspections. So it could be a different person every time who goes out and does these inspections. And so we figured we have a lot of tools that we use to detect changes in the Earth environment, and the engineers have a bunch that they use for changes in the built environment. So we're combining those to produce both continuous monitoring of this major library, and also we're now conducting yearly repeat surveys with a variety of different instrument types and merging them together into forming a digital surrogate of the building that then we can compare every year when we go back and do a resurvey, and especially if there's been a major event, a weather event or a major earthquake, we can compare our digital surrogate, sort of a before and after picture of what the building looks like, and see if there have been any major changes. So fortunately or unfortunately, since we started this monitoring not quite 2 years ago, there haven't been any major earthquakes. So we have a big continuous record now of almost 2 years and 2 repeat surveys that show basically a healthy building structure, which is great. And one of the next steps is sort of to impose thresholds so that we can detect if anything different and unexpected is going on at the building, so we can identify that someone needs to get out there and see what's happened.
Is this type of monitoring where engineers and geologists are working together common, or?
I don't know, and I wouldn't classify myself as a geologist. I'm a geodesist, I guess, which
Earth scientist.
Earth scientist, sure. But basically, this stems from the fact that what the majority of my work is earthquake early warning with GPS, and GPS ends up being just a great tool for looking for change, as Wes talked about earlier. So we've installed some GPS equipment and some general seismic sensors, accelerometers on the building, and that's sort of our continuous record. So it's actually quite common in my group that when different groups in the engineering department are working on building monitoring, they'll ask us, hey, can you come instrument our building with some GPS or some seismic instrumentation so we can see what happens when we subject it to these crazy motions. There's an enormous shake table at UCSD, so earthquake simulator. It's, I believe, unless this has changed, it's the largest outdoor shake table in the world, which means that you can build these really tall, full-scale buildings on it.
So that's why you want the 3D model of the library, so you can put it on the giant shake table, or?
Oh, no. It's sort of separate, but I bring it up. That would be very cool. Would be very cool. But so basically, the reason I bring it up is because in the interim, when we haven't had any events at the library, now we're sort of piggybacking on whatever tests are happening at the shake table, because they'll build something. We can put the same instrumentation that we have on the library on those buildings on the shake table, and then they'll subject it to a big, magnitude 7.5 earthquake, and which is really cool to watch. And you get to watch this building shake.
How big is the actual shake table?
I'm not sure what the ground dimensions are, but we did it.
You said it's outdoors, so it doesn't fit inside a building, or I just have no conception of what this looks like.
Put a building on top of it.
I can look it up. They have a website. So the buildings are normally. Absolutely.
Okay,
it's bigger than this room.
Okay, so it's bigger than this conference room that we're in.
Yes, but then it has no ceiling, which is the reason that it's one of the best in the world. They have bigger ones in terms of the footprint in other places, but we can build as tall as we want. So,
cool.
So they built 4-story buildings, right?
We built a 6-story building there 2 years ago.
So it's huge.
Full size.
Yeah.
6 normal stories.
I think they've built, right before I arrived, they built a 7-story building.
Okay.
So they build, they don't have a huge footprint, but they build tall, and they'll put, lots of weird things in them. The last one I worked on very similarly, they had this whole separate project, and we just came and instrumented the building to help them understand how it was moving. But they had water tanks inside and big flat screen TVs.
Oh, wow.
And, I can't speak to what the purpose of that was, but they...
In the water tanks, I could see, you would want to see how a water tank on top of a building or as part of a building would react to these shaking forces for sure.
Yeah, well, the water tanks they had, I think, tied into the walls in different ways on each story, so they were trying to figure out how best to hold them. But yeah, this is work by Tara Hutchinson's group at UCSD.
Cool. Well, yeah, if you have any videos of that are like on YouTube or whatever, you can send me the link.
There are tons of videos
Awesome.
on YouTube. They also set that building on fire. It was very cool.
Oh, wow.
In between. So they did earthquake tests. They set a couple of the second and the sixth story on fire. And then after the fire was put out, they shook it again.
Wow. I guess
you can see the analogy. I mean,
and
if
also
you
sadly
break
for
a gas line.
Well, for California,
you break a gas line, and then there's always,
I'm imagining
Chase is helping me out. The footprint of the shake table is 7.6 meters by 12.2 meters.
That's pretty big. And then I now I understand what you mean when you say it has no ceiling, so you can build up as opposed to out, which is really cool.
So that theory makes it easy to scale up. If you know how something tall behaves, it's easier to scale up vertically than having a limit on how tall you can make it and then trying to guess what it feels tall.
Yeah.
Trying to think in terms of dimensions. It'd be more useful to have something really tall, even if it's small, than something that's really big, but it can only be so tall.
Right. I'm not a structural engineer, so I sort of take a step back from all of the building portions of it.
For sure. I'm imagining
it's a neat collaboration.
I'm imagining a future where, you have the noise canceling headphones that they hear the ambient background and then cancel it out. Like, what if eventually they could make the shake table so that you could stand on it in an earthquake and be perfectly still?
And not feel it.
Yeah.
You in a gyroscope.
Maybe that's the best way to keep keep the library safe, is just to put it on a giant shake table and have it cancel out all the earthquakes.
I was thinking about aquarium design, all these, water tanks you're putting in there.
Yeah.
So what the fish prefer as opposed to shaking. Just a thought.
I was going to ask, how strong of shaking can the table do?
They're all based on real earthquakes, real recordings that they have. So we'll do recordings from the Loma Prieta earthquake or Denali. And
that's even cooler. It's like a cover version of the earthquake.
Yeah, right. In case you missed it.
Oh, man. This sounds like so much fun. I want to go to San Diego now and I'll skip. I don't need to go to the zoo. I want to go see the shake table.
In case you missed it, come over here, spill to your house. We'll set the top floor on fire, and you can try to escape.
It's the world's most intense escape.
So the shake table can can get to a peak acceleration of 4.2 Gs, but that's empty without any weight on it.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, thanks for telling us about that. Margaret, can you tell us a little bit about ocean warming drives increased mass loss at 79 North Glacier, northeast Greenland?
It's Neocophus Glacier, but...
That's the first word of your abstract. So 79 North is another way of saying that same glacier?
It's just the word 79 in Danish.
Is it really?
The 79 fjord.
All right, okay.
Yeah.
I'm seeing it now that you've pointed that out.
It took me a long time a lot of Danish people walking me through it very slowly to get there.
Interestingly enough, I had a similar experience in Iceland, because names of geographic locations in Iceland are very non-creative.
Formulaic.
They're very formulaic, so things are named after other things that are relevant in the area. And so, for example, the famous volcano that erupted in 2010, Eyjafjallajökull, is named for the region in the area. So the name is really long, but it just means that mountain with a glacier right by the islands. and it's very formulaic, very consistent across the entire geography of Iceland, which means you end up with a lot of things named in similar fashions. And there's a lot of mountains, or small peaks, I should say, that look like churches because they're glaciated, volcanic edifices, and so they're very sharp. So there's a lot of locations on the Icelandic map that are called Kirkjufell, which just means church mountain.
So how is that helpful? You say, it's the volcano that's next to the ocean by the glacier.
Well,
yeah, okay.
You go towards the ocean, you look for a volcano with a glacier.
I just kind of assume there's hundreds of those on Iceland.
There are. So hopefully you know some.
All right.
I think I'm going to stick with Wesley and Dara's GPS.
Yeah, we'll help locate you.
So Greenland.
Yes, this glacier, you were saying how, I'm reading your abstract, and you're talking about how like this glacier is on both land and the ocean, if I understand correctly?
Yeah, so glaciers are ice that formed on land, and it flows under its own weight. And so basically all these big ice sheets, they form in the middle of a continent like Antarctica or Greenland. It's a big island. And they flow pretty slowly out towards the ocean. But there are certain areas where it starts to flow faster and it gets channelized into spots like 79 North Glacier. And so the glacier part is sort of where that ice flow from the middle of the ice sheet meets the ocean. And then because the ocean there is pretty cold, instead of immediately melting or breaking off, a lot of the ice just starts to float on top of the ocean.
You call that an ice tongue?
I called it an ice tongue. It's also called an ice shelf.
Tongue is very descriptive.
Tongue, it's narrow, it's long and narrow, so tongue seems more appropriate for that specific spot. So one of the reasons that it's really interesting is because it is this long, narrow, but quite thick ice that's confined in a fjord. So there's tall mountains on both sides. And where that ice tongue is in contact with the sides of the fjord, it kind of holds back all of the ice that's trying to flow in behind it. And so 79 North is sort of draining a very large area of the ice sheet. But we think that ice tongue, because it's 70 kilometers long, is pretty big. It has the ability to probably hold back some of the ice that would be melting faster otherwise. So we're really interested to know how much this floating ice tongue is thinning, and whether the thinning is enough to let the ice behind it start to flow faster, or even if it thins so much that it breaks up entirely in the future. We think that could have consequences for how fast that ice is flowing and then how much it's contributing to sea level rise. And Greenland is contributing currently much more to sea level rise than Antarctica. It has less ice, so in the long run, if both ice sheets were to melt entirely, which is not just around the corner, but in the long run, Antarctica has the potential to contribute much more. But because Greenland's closer to the equator, it's going faster right now. It's contributing more. So we're pretty interested to know how the ocean might play a role in those processes.
Yeah, because we've talked about on the show before, you have the thermohaline circulation that is going to be affected by a bunch of freshwater ice from Greenland getting dumped into it, and might significantly change how the ocean currents flow around the northern hemisphere where most people live and we try to grow a lot of food. So
that's why I say I study ice-ocean interaction, because there really are effects that go in both directions. The ocean warming can cause the ice to melt faster. The ice melting can then freshen the ocean, and that could have big implications for the circulation, like you're saying.
And did you go do field work out on the glaciers? Like, what's that like?
I've been to Greenland 3 times, never to 79 North, but I've been in 3 other places, and most recently in southeast Greenland, and we were studying some icebergs there. So we got to it was a really fun cruise where we took this relatively small boat out in the fjord, and we would find a nice looking iceberg. Some of our collaborators would put a GPS on there, so they kind of, could work with some of you guys on that. And then we would just drive our ship around it in a circle for hours, just trying to get as many measurements as we could of the shape of the iceberg and the ocean properties around it.
How big is it? How big did it take to do a circuit?
So we did a number of different icebergs. The biggest one was about 700 meters long on one side, so it's like 7 football fields kind of stacked next to each other. And I don't think we actually made it around that one more than once. At some point we just had to call it quits because it was taking us too long and it was too foggy. But yeah, so some of these things are like huge buildings and other ones are much smaller. And so that's why we wanted to look at as many of them as possible, because we think they might have different interactions with the ocean depending on how deep they are and how wide they are.
So there's completely different dynamics at play when it's just an iceberg versus a glacier with an ice tongue coming out.
Yeah, and Greenland used to have a lot more of these ice tongues, but right now there are only 3 big ice tongues left. And so that's why we're so interested in studying 79 North. There's another glacier immediately to the south that had an ice tongue until about 5 years ago, and then the whole thing just disintegrated quite quickly over the course of just a few years. And so we think the ocean probably played a role in it, and this is our opportunity to measure what's happening in the ocean underneath this ice tongue before it goes.
And are you just measuring temperature, or what other variables are you considering?
We're measuring the temperature and the salinity and the currents. So we're sort of trying to get an idea of so what we saw during the year of measurements that we have is that the fjord got significantly warmer, and that drove the melting that I talked about in my presentation. And so what we're hoping is to get an idea of which pathways that warm water is coming from. If it has similar properties to ocean water that we find in other places, that can give us an idea of where we need to look to see what might be coming down the pike for that fjord.
Sounds like maybe not good news, unfortunately.
It's probably not good news. I think, my record right now, my time series is too short to say 100% that the warming that we saw during that time is going to continue. But it was a very dramatic warming in just under 9 months. And it was enough to drive a significant increase in the melt rate of that particular glacier. So it wasn't great news, but we're hoping to get some more measurements because we need a longer record to be able to say for sure whether that's something that is sustained or whether it was just a 1 year kind of phenomenon. Yeah.
Interesting.
But certainly over that time period, it caused much higher melting.
Well, it may not be clear whether or not your glacier story is a climate change story, but you guys are part of sort of a climate change story because you all decided to take the train to AGU. So, Joe, how do you like that?
That was pretty cool.
Yeah, I thought it was that earthquake table. I want to ride one of those. You really test out your shock absorbers on your car with one of those, Joe.
Yeah.
Put me on a mountain bike on that.
I feel like if there was in an earthquake, a car would be a pretty solid place to be.
It didn't work out well for Lois Lane in the first Superman movie.
Ooh.
Did it not? I haven't seen it. Shame.
Yeah, Lex Luthor's plan is to he buys him a bunch of real estate in Nevada and then tries to knock California into the sea with the big one.
Oh, okay.
And that way he'll have beachfront property.
Gotcha.
In the movie versions, excluding the Jesse Eisenberg one, in the movie versions, most of Lex Luthor's plans are just real estate schemes.
Mm.
It's
So
almost
that was
as
the very
if
first Batman movie.
Superman.
Christopher
Reeve.
Sorry.
Yeah. It's
Superman. Yeah.
It's almost as if evil billionaires are also real estate developers. I'm just throwing that out there.
Almost.
There's a weird trend in the pop culture consciousness that if you're a billionaire real estate developer, you're probably also evil or have the aptitude for evil and evil thinking and schemes.
Interesting.
So, certainly have the resources to be evil.
Yes. But Joe, I don't know if Lois Lane, as intrepid a reporter as she is, would have an appropriate earthquake survival kit in her car, which I'm sure you do.
Yep.
At all
I'm
times.
definitely a prepared Californian.
Yes. And what's in that preparedness kit?
Drinks.
Well, if you have drinks in your preparedness kit, I guess we better talk about what we're drinking so everybody knows how to get their kit ready. So we'll do that in our next segment. What are you drinking? Coming up next. Well, you can lead a Joe to water, but can you make him drink? I don't know. Let's find out, because it wouldn't be an episode of Science Sort of if we didn't talk about what we are drinking. Joe, what do you got for us this time?
All right. So this time around, I have another drink from my local poke store, or poke restaurant.
How is the poke? You've talked about the drinks, but you haven't told us about the fish.
The poke is actually quite good. That we've gotten a sudden surge of poke restaurants.
It's the new hot restaurant trend. It's the new hot fast casual situation.
Yeah, and I am
here
right? for it.
Couple, yeah.
So we've had a few pop up in the.
Do you go salmon?
area.
Do you go tuna? How do you? What's your?
I do so white rice, salmon, tuna, crab salad, edamame, masago, scallions.
Is masago? Are those the eggs? What are the masago?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then dried seaweed, sesame seeds, and then a garlic ponzu, which is a really spicy sauce, and then some more spicy sriracha-based sauce at the end.
Light it up.
It's quite tasty.
Nice.
Yeah. What are you washing that down with?
Today, I am washing it down with another mystery Japanese beverage. This time, It is an ume juice drink.
Is that the plum?
Yeah, it looks like plums. Little green plums.
Well, isn't umeboshi the really sour? Not spicy. It is sour plum.
Maybe. Let's find out.
Okay.
I will open it.
I mean, are you going to be able to tell just on taste if it's plum?
I'll be able to taste if it's sour.
I don't know that I could tell if it was plum just by I don't know that I would know in a blind taste test. I don't think I could pick plum out of a lineup.
I could.
You gave me a
just
plum,
like a plum by itself.
a date, an apricot.
All three of those are very different.
Are they? I don't know. This is pretty apricot.
It's pretty apricot-y. So I'm getting apricot.
Yeah, but it's in a soda.
And I mean, like apricot plum. That's like the same.
I just don't think there's that much flavor variation in the stone fruits. There, I said it.
I don't. Yeah, I mean, I'll go along with that.
Interesting thought.
But it's good. It's not as tart as the yuzu drink I had on episode 301. It's a little bit sweeter, but it's good. Yeah, umeshu. It's confusing. It's a non-alcoholic drink, but there are multiple percentages on here. There's a 100%, there's a 10%, and there's a 0%. One of those is 0% alcohol. I don't know what the 100% is, and I don't know what the 10% is. But
you better hope it's not 100% alcohol. You're not going to make it to the end of this show.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not 100% alcohol. It's definitely the 0% alcohol. That one actually has some English to it. Everything else is Japanese characters.
I think it's the sour kind when it's that fruit, but it's like salt cured, and it like accentuates the sourness. Somebody write in. Somebody will write in. Ben, if you're still a listener to the show, we know you won't join us and talk to us anymore, but please come back, Ben.
Write in.
We
Tell
miss
us
you,
your
Ben.
opinion.
You're better at this
Write
weird
us a
Japanese
review.
drink thing than I am.
It's possible that there's a thing I'll have recorded with Ben that'll have come out before this, so people might be like, why are they still acting like Ben doesn't come on the show? But timelines, people. This is not necessarily being recorded in sequence.
It's not.
It's like a movie. You record it when people are available.
That's an excellent... Wow, you got all Hollywood on us, Joe.
Well, I do live out here. I'm basically in the industry.
So, Joe, I bet you're wondering what we're drinking.
I sure am, Ryan. Hey, Ryan, what are you guys drinking?
Let me tell you about it, Joe, because, we've been at this for a while. You might even say that we have a partnership. And that's what Abe and I are drinking, is the partnership, a collaboration series beer.
And that's 2 words.
Yes.
We are partnership.
From Heavy Seas, which is a Maryland-based, Baltimore-based brewery that is all pirate-themed stuff that Patrick has had on the show before. And then the Maine Beer Company, which is a brewery from the state of Maine. That's all I got.
And it's the main brewery in Maine.
That might actually be true.
Is there like a picture of a ship and it's labeled partner?
It is actually a picture of, I don't think I can call it a handshake, but it's a hook handshake.
Hand hook shake.
Hand hook shake. I like that order better. Yeah.
And this is a red IPA, which is a style that I really like. I don't know, Abe, I've ever asked you how you feel about the red IPA.
I have not had many, so
they tend to be like a very malty.
Yeah. I mean, I'm generally a fan of all beer styles. Some more than others, but
let's try this
IPAs in general, especially if they're not traditional.
Skål.
Skål.
Ooh, that's more caramely.
Oh, it is. It makes me think more of a brown ale.
Orange blossom, grapefruit, and lemon hop aromas sail atop a burnished malt backbone.
Just like on a ship.
Oh, and they also contribute to the Clean Water Fund that celebrates the connection between clean water and great beer. Without clean water, there is no beer. And they support programs to clean the water. Hey, one half of the people that made this beer is Heavy Seas. They're probably interested in what the Scripps Oceanographic Institute has to say.
Absolutely.
Let's get back to our interview with them and find out what they have to say about being from the Scripps Oceanographic Institute.
And stuff.
Scripps on a train.
prompted this idea to come all the way to Washington, D.C. from San Diego using the train?
I think Adrian is sort of our original train aficionado.
Yes. We've taken it now for several years, and every year the group who have taken it has grown a little bit. And it started off as pretty much for fun. So it's a couple-day trip. There's no Wi-Fi. Well, I guess Amtrak would probably disagree, but in practice, there's no Wi-Fi. And it's a relaxing trip, and you see beautiful parts of the country that you may not otherwise see. But upon more reflection and the more people joined, it became clear that it was also beneficial for the environment to take the train more. And so with those two benefits, people enjoy both the relaxation of it as compared to air travel, and if you get a sleeper car, that can be very comfortable, and also the chance to see the country, and there's a green aspect. So it's a win-win-win as long as you have several days to devote to it.
So I have some stats that you tweeted, Margaret. I want to plug all your Twitter handles and everything before we wrap up here. But
I have to amend at least one of the stats, but yeah.
Okay, well you can correct me as I go. But you said how many students did you lose? No, 8 students and 4 postdocs. So 8 students and 4 postdocs, all from Scripps Oceanographic Institute. 3,263.48 miles. Is that one way?
One way.
So you have to go back.
One way.
68 hours, 57 stops, 18 books, 12 plus games, 11 states plus DC, 6 posters, and 1 disco ball. Did you guys supply the disco ball, or is that an Amtrak?
BYO disco ball.
We brought our own. And just a small clarification, one of the postdocs is a former Scripps student who we picked up in LA.
Yeah, so that's the first amendment. The second amendment
It's more of a Congo line than anything.
It was 13 states. I got bad information. But as I was counting my 12th and 13th state, I thought,
So you started in California.
And once DC gets statehood, we don't need to go through all the states. But yeah, once DC gets statehood, then we can tweak that number as well. But yeah, so do you guys have a sense of how much carbon you save by not flying, or is that?
It depends on the trip. It depends on where you're going. But for example, we do have a better idea about just going to San Francisco. When 12 people take the train, for example, we think it's about a third. But there's a lot of different factors at play, and Dara has actually done a little more research than me.
Yeah, Margaret and I have talked about this a lot. There's definitely a point of diminishing return when your trip gets very long, and because we came completely across the country, we're sort of reaching that point of diminishing return. So really our goal with publicizing this trip was to try to encourage people that, if we can do it for 3 nights and 4 days, that if they can do it for a short trip that's just, 1 overnight, and then you don't need to commit all this time, you can do it after work and be there the next day, because in those shorter scenarios, it's significant savings.
Unfortunately, the most climate-friendly option would have been to not come.
Yeah.
But
so I mean, that's sort of what I have ended up getting out of it a lot, is that I think, especially when you see 13 states plus the District of Columbia over a couple of days, you really internalize how far you come. So you think, if I get on the plane in San Diego, I work for a few hours or take a quick nap and wake up in DC, then I think this is great. It's so easy. I can fly across the country all the time. When you really commit to sitting through the whole thing, being on the train, seeing everything that's in between, you think, wow, this is a big undertaking. I've, crossed a lot of area. And what we found out, I think, when we did more research is that no matter how you slice it, it's a really long trip with a big carbon footprint. And so a lot of us are from this part of the country, and we live in San Diego. And I think that for all of us, it's a sort of a wake-up call to think a little bit harder about how we can make fewer trips and find ways to, make the most out of each time that we do it. So a lot of us are going back to visit family, or, combining this with other trips while we're here. And I think that for me, taking the train really helped me think about that in a more intentional way.
And one thing I've been thinking about recently is, even though the amount of carbon you output is very important and obviously is often in the news the most, there are a lot of environmental problems. And if you go through the country, you can see, for example, changes in land use, or just to me, sometimes in some areas there's a lot of garbage on the ground, and you can see other things about agriculture, and we need all those things, but there are environmental problems, not just carbon emissions. And going out and seeing them makes it very clear what they are.
Yeah, what was it? There was a golf course that we passed by, and it was nice and green, and everything else is dead. And it's how do they do that? Yeah.
Coming from San Diego, we see all the time.
Did you guys, and like, you had a sleeper car, or I've never taken a train trip that long.
Oh yeah, it's
actually,
nice.
Yeah, so it's like, it's a pretty fun way to travel.
Yeah, you get your meals comped too, so
Well, you buy them.
well,
But they're included in the ticket.
It's in the ticket. Okay.
but yeah, I know, like I sleep so well on it because you're like gently rocked to
You're kind of
sleep.
cradled to sleep.
It's a lot like being on a research ship.
Yeah.
I loved it. I had the best time. And I think partly, like Adrian was saying at the beginning, it's just a much more relaxing way to travel in a lot of ways.
No
compared
stress
to
at all. Like going through like TSA and all that. Like you don't have to do that with the train. Like just hop on and enjoy it.
And how long were the stops? Like, were you able to get out and see parts of the, or the stops pretty short, and you kind of have
We
to...
got out for about 25 minutes in Albuquerque, and we had a 3.5 hour layover, so switching trains in Chicago.
So you really are on the train for 6 days.
Yeah, and
3
people...
3 days.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Wow.
It's four days
68
flight.
68
Yeah, 68
hours.
hours. Yeah, good
Looked at the
catch.
6 and then said it. Yes.
But, I mean, people have asked me all week, how did you stay in that tiny box for that many days? And I think people are imagining plane travel, and that would be impossible for me, at least for that long. Or people are imagining their normal commuter rail where you sit in one seat for your whole trip. But, you know, you get to get up and move around. You go from your sleeper car to the dining car for meals to the observation car, which has floor-to-ceiling windows and is beautiful to sit at for a long time. And it kind of flies by. I mean...
I wish it was longer.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So the first year that we did, I think it was Adrian, myself, and one other student who is now a postdoc, and she actually was the one that we picked up in LA. We went to San Francisco, which is like an 8-hour drive, or what, like is it a 2-hour flight or something, or less?
Maybe even less.
Yeah. Hour 20 or something. But it's like a 16-hour train ride. So we just got on early in the morning and made it by the end of the day, and we like absolutely loved it. There was a wine tasting on it. Like,
Yep.
It's like the only Amtrak rail that has a wine taste.
And really, when you factor in finding parking in San Francisco, it can take 16 hours.
Yeah.
You might as well just take the train, because you know the train has a parking spot waiting for it.
Yeah. So there was 3 of us, and then like the next time we ended up going to New Orleans, we had 9 people go on that, which was a 48-hour total, 48 hour train ride. And then this year we had 12 people on a 68 hour. So people always ask like, oh yeah, how do you do that? And it's like, it's fun, and we actually are able to. It's nice to kind of see like we're getting more and more interest as it goes on.
No one who has ever done it with us has decided not to do it the next year.
That's
So,
true.
you know, it's good.
We're just gaining. And I always use these two, Wes and Adrian, as my examples when people say, oh, I could never be in there. Like, well, they're pretty tall, and they make it work. It's not uncomfortable, because I don't think people look at me and think, well, if you can do it, I can too. But if they look at Adrian and Wes, they might think they're capable.
And yeah, it sounds like you guys brought some board games, and people were allowed to catch up on like reading books, and you know, you've got power outlets, so it's not like your laptop's going to run out of power like it does on a plane flight for me. And
Right.
And they're surprisingly comfortable, even just the seats. I've only been on short, like 1 to 2 hour trips transferring between cities in the US, and the 2 or 3 times I've done it, every time I get on the train, I'm like, oh man, I could have brought so many more things. I could have brought more books. I could have brought, I always have my computer with me so I can do work, but then at the same time, sometimes I'm too comfortable to do work. I just kind of want to sit and read. So it's a lot more comfortable than I think people really expect. And especially, you mentioned the comparison to like your commuter rail. Very, very different.
Yeah.
I think my highlights were, I think this was Adrian's idea to do a gift exchange, a white elephant gift exchange on the train,
Neat.
where everybody had to buy the present after the train journey began.
that's cool.
And
I like
so
that.
we had a lot of funny random things from Chicago, some interesting Amtrak branded items. It was a really funny set of gifts that people came up with, but it was also just really fun to see how much buy-in there was from the group. Everybody that came was really excited to just, make the most of every part of the trip. And we also brought a gingerbread house to decorate. We had an advent calendar.
It's very difficult.
I was just thinking about that.
Like, we need the sugar to kind of set, the icing, and then the chimney just falls over and you hit a bump.
Sounds like you should have practiced on the shaking.
Yeah. We'll perfect it later.
And so some of you were tweeting out your journey using the hashtag trAinGU, where the A in train is capitalized, so it's like the little AGU. And it looked like you actually got some attention from Amtrak. So it looked like even Amtrak was aware you guys were doing this and was kind of on board.
Do you think they'll give us a free ticket next year?
No, sponsored.
We're looking.
Looking for sponsors.
On your poster, brought to you by Amtrak. Literally.
Physically brought to you.
Yeah.
One of the things I thought was really cool was after we started tweeting with the hashtag trAinGU, other people started using it who were getting on trains to come to AGU too, and letting us know that they were taking trains. And those people were taking shorter journeys that probably do have a really good carbon footprint savings, which is great for them. But I think sort of the back and forth that we had on Twitter with some of those people will hopefully encourage others in the community who were watching along with the AGU hashtags to...
I think what I like about the idea so much is that people who are, climate change deniers or skeptical of climate science, one of the things they'll point to is that, like, well, you climate scientists, you're constantly jetting around the world to talk about your research, and, like, isn't that hypocritical? And fundamentally, yeah, it is hypocritical, but the idea, I think, if you're a climate scientist, is you would say, well, by flying around and promoting the work that I do, I'm hopefully having a net positive impact overall by convincing people that climate change is happening. But I really like that you guys just fully undercut that and said, like, actually, let's just put our money where our mouth is and take the train instead. And I think that's just, I don't know, it's gutsy in a way that I think is really aspirational and inspirational to a lot of people who do the kind of work we do.
It's been really encouraging also the response that we've gotten. I mean, I have friends from Scripps who said, everybody's asked me all week whether I took the train. People that didn't take the train are getting asked whether they took the train. And I talked with the director of Scripps who was saying, I guess it's really great to see these people that are sort of higher ups in the field that are really starting to think about the footprint of these conferences and what are the things that we need to go to conferences for, what are the things that can be done differently. So one thing is that we can all find our most efficient way to travel, and we can think about different ways to, have some of the same conversations virtually in the future. But I think just everything that people are doing to show how hard they're thinking about it and our willingness to change what we do, it's really encouraging, and hopefully it will be noticed by the people who are, calling out the perceived hypocrisy.
Yeah.
We were in a really unique position, though, because we are in academia where, we could tell our advisors, hey, we have to leave Thursday to go to the conference. That's not till next week, so that we can get there via train. And they were sort of on board and supportive. But a lot of people don't have 4 days to make it to where they need to be in a work environment. It turns out taking the train across the country is more expensive than flying across the country. So if it's the best way for the environment, that's great. And if you can afford to do it, that's great. But certainly it's difficult to incentivize if you're not in a position where you can shell out a few extra $100 to sit on a train for 4 days.
That takes us back to diminishing returns as well, right?
But
how long of a train ride before it's more economic?
That's true.
But we took the longest possible ride. I mean, if you were just going a couple hours away, you could either fly, and sometimes those flights are expensive, or take a train, and it's cheaper, it's more affordable, I think, maybe that way.
Mm-hmm.
On the shorter version, you're probably right.
Like, you don't need to take 4 days to go between DC and Boston, for example. You could.
But yeah, hopefully just for people to start thinking a little bit more about what are the alternatives to making that trip at all, or how can I combine a few different trips that I need to make across the country into one mega trip to the extent that it's possible.
Yeah.
I think Katherine Hayhoe is somebody she's a climate scientist who has a really, I think, compassionate and inspirational way of talking about this, where she says, you shouldn't say I can never see my family again. Like, nobody expects that of anybody. That's not reasonable. But how can you make the fewest number of trips and get the most out of it every time, and, show people that you are willing to sort of, in your personal life, act out what you want to see from the rest
be
of
the
world.
change you want to be
See. Something along the lines of what they say. So I want to go around and make sure we give everyone the resources they need to connect with you all online. So can we just go around the table one more time? If you have a website or you have a Twitter account, I'll link to everything in the show notes, but I'll just go ahead and have you say it so that people listening can hear it as well. So Someone wants to start. Wes, you want to start?
Sure. What do I need to say? Just a Twitter handle? Or
your website or whatever whatever people can go to online to find more about your work.
You can tweet at me at SIO HydroGeodesy.
I got a website, which is probably hard to remember, but igppweb.ucsd.edu/tilde Doran. Or you can just do
the name of her glacier.
You can email me at adoran@ucsd.edu.
Mine's a little easier. You can find me on Twitter at Dara_Berg_.
2 underscores.
2. Gotta have them both.
Okay.
I similarly have a really unfortunately hard to pronounce Twitter handle. It's Madge. It's spelled MAAAHGE.
Whoa.
It's like Marge, but it's Madge.
Madge.
The hashtag is trAinGU, and it sounds like you guys have started something of a movement, so hopefully we'll keep hearing more and more about this in the future. And thank you all for joining us here on the show to talk about your
It's fun to talk about.
Advocacy.
Thank you.
We really appreciate
Thanks
it.
for your time.
And you can find our Seuss poem on my Twitter account too.
Yes, I will definitely see if I can. Yeah, I'll make sure to try to link people to that too. That's exciting.
Yeah, it's kind of fun with that. So we were in between a lot of different hashtags what we wanted to use. I think trAinGU just looked best writing out. My personal favorite saying though was AG Choo Choo, but
That's
It's
pretty good.
kind of unbeatable.
but it looked weird and it took up too many characters. So.
There were creative differences.
Yeah.
Sweet. Well, thank you again to the Scripps trAinGU team for taking the time to sit down with us and tell us about their awesome initiative of reducing their carbon footprint while still getting it out to AGU to present all of their work on climate and Earth-related stuff at AGU.
And thanks to them for telling us about their research too. And something cool about this interview was because it was put together by the communications people at the Scripps Oceanographic Institute, they actually had a member of their communications team in the room with us while we were doing the interview. And so he actually tweeted out some photos of us while we were interviewing them. So if you want to see me and Abe in the middle of an interview trying to look professional, you can see that on our Twitter feed at sciencesortative.com, and we'll link to that in the show notes for this episode at sciencesortative.com. So what do you think of that, Joe?
Pretty rad. Hella rad.
Oh, California. Mr. Big Time Hollywood over there.
Dope.
Well, Joe, you know what I think is hella cool?
What's that, Ryan?
Feedback from the listeners. That's what we do in our final segment of the show.
It's totally dope.
And that's coming up next.
Sick, brah.
Segment of the show where we feature feedback from the listeners. You wonderful listeners, you Paleo Posse out there, always be getting in touch with us and patronizing us. And patronizing sometimes sounds like a bad thing. Not sure why it's the same word for going to a business as it is for talking down to somebody. Yeah. But we have patrons, and that's because...
Listen, Ryan, let me explain it to you.
They're fantastic.
I guess you don't understand why it's different.
Are you gonna mansplain it to me?
It's just different. Okay, get on with the show.
Thank you. We are supported in part by the fine folks who give to us monthly over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/sciencesortative. And one of the things you can get when you give at the... Which level is it, Joe? Avogadro's Army level or higher? The $6.23 for Avogadro?
Yep.
So when you give us a mole of money... Oh, if we only had a mole of money, that'd be so much money!
Ooh, if we had a mole. That'd be fun.
Avogadro's Army level or higher, one of the things you get is a thesis that confers upon you a BSSO, a Bachelor of Science, sort of. And our thesis this week is for Leah A. Or is it Leia A? Is she a Princess of Alderaan or terrestrial person. So what do we think? What are we thinking for trains, oceans,
have to do with the ocean and
earthquakes? What do you think, Joe? You want to throw a hyperloop in? Does that count as a train?
Not yet. Let's
Okay.
keep it grounded in reality for now.
Okay.
But I do like the throwing the train in there.
What about something about earthquakes and being more powerful than a locomotive?
Oh, okay.
Ooh.
Yeah. That works.
So, like, we had the Richter scale for a while, but we don't use the Richter scale anymore because Andy Richter went to work for Conan O'Brien, and so he couldn't work in the geosciences anymore. I assume that's what happened.
Sounds
I
accurate.
assume so. What about
Joe would know,
something?
Mr. Hollywood.
Yeah, I got a meeting with him tomorrow.
All right, ask him about his scale and why we can't use it anymore. The Richter
will.
Did
scale.
he stand up?
So now we use magnitude for earthquakes, pop, pop. But what if Leah's thesis is proposing a new metric by which to judge the power of earthquakes, and it's how many trains
get derailed.
not to get derailed, but like, you know, if Superman is more powerful than a locomotive, and like we refer to cars as having horsepower, what if earthquakes have train power? Like how many train power was
How
that
many
train?
locomotives?
So a new method for quantifying the energy of an earthquake using trains as the scale. Locometrics.
My brain was going to like locomotion of plates.
Plate locomotion.
So what if it's modeling the magnetic convection cells like as if they were on train tracks?
Ooh. This is taking it in a completely different direction.
Well,
But
I mean,
what about using the
Joe didn't want me to besmirch his buddy Andy Richter.
Earth's
So
magnetic field to generate to move locomotives?
modeling Earth's magmatic convection cells as a mag-lev rail system.
Mag-lev?
Yeah, like those
Levitating
trains those trains that levitate on magnets.
Sort of like the plates magnetically levitating. I'm confused.
What about derailing the strike slip? Something about
Ooh,
trains
I like that.
and like
Okay.
Derailing the strike slip.
Do you hyphenate that or add a slash?
No, it's hyphenate. Strike slip motion
What if
at tectonic boundaries.
Joe? What's the most powerful type of engine you can think to put in a train?
I mean, I guess you could put a nuclear reactor in there. That'd be exciting.
Okay. How about
Fallout
this?
action.
What if we put two nuclear-powered trains on opposite sides of the fault, and then they each are attached to the ground, and then they pull, and so they're derailing this. They're releasing the energy from the strike slip fault because they're so powerful.
Are they? Because I think you're going to run into a...
We're testing it, Joe. We don't know.
This is research.
We haven't
Joe.
done the study yet.
Think
it's a
more
little
like a
airplane on a treadmill.
scientist.
Does that work?
What's the train reacting against?
Wait, answer my question.
On the plate.
Answer my question, Joe. Does it work?
Nope.
No, it doesn't work. You can't put an airplane on a treadmill and take off?
Oh, yeah. No, of course you can. That one, yeah.
What's there? What,
It does work.
What are you talking about that I wasn't thinking of that?
Trains pulling against the ground that they're already on.
He makes a good point.
That's like standing on a piece of plywood and pulling on the piece of plywood and hoping it moves.
Based on some of the way we saw people skiing today, I bet there's some folks
That works.
that try to do that.
Yes.
I think that's a good idea.
I like our start. Derailing the strike slip motion of San Andreas.
So if you had a nuclear powered...
modeling approach.
Wait, I have a question. If you had a nuclear powered train, could it break the sound barrier, Joe? Like very low friction railing?
Mag-lev?
It'd be tough, but I assume you could. Well, probably not. Probably not. It'd be hard to get a wheel-driven anything to break the sound barrier.
So what if we mag-leved a nuclear-powered train?
Mag-lev, maybe. Mag-lev might do it. I bet you could mag-lev through the sound barrier. Yeah, I bet that's doable. Because the problem with wheel-driven stuff is you can only spin the wheels so fast. But mag-lev doesn't have that problem.
So what about testing the efficacy of using nuclear-powered mag-lev trains as high-capacity escape vectors from earthquake-prone regions, derailing the strike-slip damage potential of San Andreas?
Yeah.
We're not using the trains to try to prevent the earthquake. We're just using them of like, we can fit a lot of people in this train and we can get it away from the area real fast.
How fast?
Yeah, I like it.
Less than 3 seconds?
Yep.
Okay,
We're
great.
testing it. We don't know. We got to test it.
All right.
Faster than the speed of sound.
let's do it.
Supersonic mag-lev.
Supersonic mag-lev.
I think how much shorter the trip would be from San Diego to DC on a supersonic mag-lev nuclear-powered train.
Yeah.
Be great.
So the thesis is testing the efficacy of supersonic
Mag-lev.
nuclear-powered mag-lev trains as high-capacity evacuation vectors.
Rapid evacuation vector.
During the big one?
During massive earthquakes or whatever, however you want to say that.
During San Andreas.
Well, then colon, right? So during massive tectonic events.
Yeah, because the maglev train doesn't get screwed up by tracks that get all messed up in the earthquake.
Colon, derailing the strike slip of San Andreas, right?
Railing the...
Because we have to do something with derailing in a train, right?
Yeah, the strike slip...
Motion
of the San Andreas.
Damage. The strike slip damage of San Andreas. All right, read it out, Abe.
So, all right. Testing the efficacy of supersonic nuclear power mag-lev trains as high-capacity rapid evacuation vectors during massive tectonic events. Derailing the strike slip damage of the San Andreas.
What do you think, Joe?
We got it.
I dig it.
Submitted for the completion of degree requirements?
Yeah, BSSO.
BSSO.
Approved.
All right. Abe, you're up next.
Awesome. I have an email from Morgan M.
It's Morgan Marshall. We talk about Morgan all the time.
Oh.
Hi, Morgan.
Joe knows Morgan. They're buddies.
I have met Morgan, actually.
I know you have.
Nice.
Once upon a time.
I was there.
Hey, Hey, guys. Morgan emailed us.
Morgan emailed us.
Do you guys know Morgan? Marshall?
I know Morgan. Yeah, what's Morgan?
Yeah. Hey, Morgan Marshall emailed us.
Tell us what he's got to say.
Let me tell you what he's got to say. So Morgan emailed us and he says, the title of his email is The Fault in Our Films.
Hey.
Can we hire Morgan to do themes for us?
Yeah.
Earthquakes have faults.
Do they?
No, some of them are good.
Do they have films?
Get it?
They actually do.
I know they actually have faults. Well, they do also have films, but I was also saying some of them are good. Anyway, I'm not explaining the joke.
Some of their faults are
Read
good.
The email. Read the email.
I get the joke.
Read the email.
So Morgan says, PaleoPOWs. 1. I want to thank you again for all the hours of discourse, intellectual and otherwise, that you continue to provide for us podcast followers. A few long flights and some exhausting bus rides in Eastern Europe finally caught me up on all the current episodes. Here's looking forward to another year full of learning and levity. B. For a long time now, I've wanted to have something worth asking about.
By the way.
Yes.
Yep.
I do this all the time, and it's one of my favorite stupid jokes, is to switch your bulleting system
bullet
per
points.
bullet. Yep.
Yes, it is fantastic.
Big fan.
So it says B. For a long time now, I've wanted to have something worth asking about, but it inevitably ends up like that awkward moment at the end of a job interview when they ask, so do you have any questions for us? No, I don't. Ever. But that all changed on my flight home from Europe yesterday. After scrolling through the entertainment options...
a job interview on your flight home
Humble
from
brag.
Europe?
Yes. After scrolling through the entertainment options, and since I was flying back to San Francisco, I just couldn't resist the temptation to watch San Andreas on the tiny screen in front of me. And wow. Just wow. So many things that wish they were science. From wedging a rescue helicopter into Lock Canyon.
Yeah, that was real dumb.
I haven't seen this movie, so
I haven't either.
Okay.
But that just sounds
like the first
dumb.
5 minutes.
Okay.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah.
It's not too much of a spoiler.
So, spoiler alert, the office building tearing in half and falling down in 2 different directions. And really just any given moment of that movie, I was more than half expecting a great white shark attack during the tsunami. It was ridiculous. It was glorious. It was laughable. I loved it. This isn't just a nomination for the next Science Sort of Theater. However, we're still waiting.
I know.
The movie got me thinking more seriously about natural disasters, West Coast style. Having grown up in Seattle in the shadow of Mount Rainier, with a VHS of Surviving the Big One on our media shelf, I've always wondered how big the big one might actually be. What kind of damage could we realistically expect in the age of seismic retrofitting and modern engineering? We could watch Twister knowing it would never happen to us this side of the Rockies, but Dante's Peak and San Andreas hit a little closer to home. What would happen if Rainier, Baker, Bachelor, or Shasta went St. Helena and us? Cool, so I think we'll pause here for a second to answer some of these questions.
Well, I mean, the rest of his point is asking the question. Yeah.
It's more questions. So Morgan continues. Are there any reasonable predictions or models for possible seismic or volcanic events and what their scope might be? What is the state of our predictive capabilities for such events these days? Sounds like a show for Volcan Abe.
That's you.
Who's that?
That's my Twitter handle. And then to finish out, he says, Roman numeral 3. Oh, and what am I drinking? Well, in light of the San Andreas experience, I've decided to pour one out for San Francisco. So there's a few ounces of anchor steam in the snow outside, and what's left is in the glass. I hereby race to you. Plural.
It's called y'all.
Y'all.
Morgan, we have a word for that in English.
Well,
it's y'all.
Is it, how many plural? Because it could be all y'all.
Vosotros.
Right now, there's just 3 of us.
It's Vosotros.
No, that's not a thing.
It is Vosotros.
That's not a thing.
Read the rest of the email.
So, to finish out, Morgan says, keeping silence in my heart and ever ready to sponsor the timer duck silence, just say the word. Morgan M. All right, so let's get back to some of the... there's a PS. That's right.
Postscript.
Postscript. I did all my Christmas shopping through the Amazon link.
Woo.
Sweet. Awesome.
Like a
Morgan,
boss.
thank you. We get a little bit of cut of that, not from you, but from Jeff Bezos. So
Right out of his pocket.
Thank you.
He comes over to my apartment.
Straight out of the
hands
pocket.
me a check.
Whatever's
once a
in his
month.
pocket.
It's whatever's in his pockets.
And
which
it's
is
a check.
It's more money than we would actually get from the affiliate.
That's true.
He just doesn't care to even count that small. So
Yeah. So, okay. So, first question that Morgan asks, we go back up here. It's, what kind of damage could we realistically expect in the age of seismic retrofitting and modern engineering? For me, that's a tough one to answer. I am less well-versed in the seismology end of things, but in general, retrofitting has come a long ways from where it used to be. And the short and simple answer is that it depends. It depends on what the earthquake is, what the magnitude, where it hits. There are lots of factors that we just cannot predict. And so it really comes down to, how it all happens. The magnitude, the duration have a big effect on it. And I think what we could expect is that modern engineering will reduce the kind of damage that we get. But at the end of the day, we're still just kind of subject to chance and what happens with the next tectonic event and the next earthquake.
There's a quote by this guy, Will Durant, who says, civilization exists by geological consent, subject to change without notice. And I always think about that with these sorts of questions, because it's like, we can build it as best as we can for the biggest one we've ever seen, but there's no guarantee that the next one won't still be bigger.
Right.
And that's really what it comes down to is, if the question is what is our ability to model, what is our ability to predict, both of those, we model as best we can, we predict as best we can, but realistically, when it comes to seismic events we can't directly observe what's happening. There was an XKCD comic about that recently, about every aspect of this system we want to study is blocked by miles of rock. And so it's hard to look and see what's going on. Our ability to predict is still very limited. And unlike predicting whether or not it's going to rain, predictions about geologic seismic events come with things like evacuations and the potential for a lot of buildings to fall down. And so there was a case recently where Italian geologists were arrested for
mispredicting an earthquake, thinking that it wasn't going to be as big as it was, and then it ended up being quite a disaster because a big earthquake happened and the damage that followed killed a lot of people.
So there's our ability to predict is still very limited, and then when our predictions get taken too seriously or not seriously enough, or we just don't get things quite exactly right, the consequences, both for the people making the predictions and for the people affected by the predicted area, are big.
Right.
So if it sounds like Abe and I are hedging and not really trying to give a definitive answer, it's because it's very complicated in the first place, and then the potential effect of trying to predict a very complicated system is also very complicated. So it's multiple levels of complexity at play here.
Right. And so one thing that we can do, which is never going to get us to, the ideal of being able to predict what's going to happen. But one thing that we can do is look at the past and see everything that's ever happened. In this case, if we're talking about the San Andreas, we can look back at every event that has happened along the San Andreas system, and we can build a model that tells us, based on each of those events, meaning each earthquake and the damage that it produced, we can build a system, a model that kind of gives us an idea of what damage to expect. And that's how we counteract that. We can't predict it. We can't tell you this is going to happen this time, or we're going to be able to tell, within 10 or 20 minutes that this is happening. Realistically speaking, we might not be able to get there. And again, as Ryan mentioned, is like we have very little visibility into what's happening.
Well, not only that, a lot has changed, right? Since the data points, right? So like the Northridge quake in 94, that was a 6.7 in the LA area, and it did a ton of damage. But in the aftermath, building codes were revised.
Right.
A lot of buildings were all the buildings that fell down that couldn't survive a 6.7, they fell down in the quake. They got rebuilt to code, and now they're stronger than they were before. So if you had that same quake again today, it might not do as much damage.
Right. And so what we can expect, going back to Morgan's question, is that if if everything occurs as we would expect, meaning earthquakes in areas where buildings have been retrofitted are not different than what they've been in the past, then we hope that those earthquakes are going to respond in the way that they were designed to respond and not cause damage. That is the best case scenario, right? We can't say that's going to be 100% certainty, but what we know is that it's going to minimize loss of life and loss of property and damage because they've been designed to do that. So even if they fail 50%, that's already 50% better than what it used to be, right? And so that's
we learn every
big
time,
advantage.
But the cost of learning is high.
Yes. So that's the big kind of like, we'll never be able to predict, but we expect with all the changes that we've made to be able to save a lot more lives and save property by taking all of these precautions like retrofitting buildings based on what we've learned from previous events. So that's a huge major step, maybe one of the biggest steps that we could take realistically at the moment. So that kind of goes around the question, but that's because the answer to the question is just we just don't know what to expect. We can guess, right, based on what's happened in the past. So realistically, that's the bottom line. And modern engineering has come a long way. So, hopefully that is the case.
But I think we're all pretty sure that modern engineering is coming to the end of its ideas. They're probably not going to come up with anything cool and new for a while. So
right. So we
can probably close the patent office down.
Yeah, let's just shut it down.
So that's the first question. The next question was, what would happen if Rainier, Baker, Bachelor, Shasta, went St. Helens on us? And again, best prediction that we got is that, well, it's going to be similar to what they've done in the past, which is that these are
My question is, St. Helens was an explosive eruption. Would all of the ones you listed also be explosive eruptions?
Yes, they're all part of the same chain of volcanoes, so they're similarly created.
So there's some volcanoes that don't really explode; they just kind of go bleh,
like Hawaii.
Like, yeah,
yes.
Bleh, lava.
And one thing I will, yes, exactly like the, and these ones go more like,
like what?
Right?
No, they go more.
Excellent Foley going on
a little bit more powerful than that.
I don't want to get my mic wet.
One thing that I point out, because my background is in studying eruptions that are like 3-4 orders of magnitude more powerful than this, is that we think of St. Helens as an explosive eruption, and it is, but it's still very much a mild kind of intermediate eruption on the scale of, if we think Hawaii to Yellowstone. Hawaii and Mount St. Helens are 2 orders of magnitude closer to each other than something like even the smallest eruption from Yellowstone. And so it's still relatively minor, but it is controlled by composition, and that is controlled by the environment in which these volcanoes are being created. So they're all part of the Cascade Range. So they have some similarities. They share compositions and style of eruption from what we can tell in the record. And so, again, going back to we can tell you what we would expect if these volcanoes erupted in the exact same way that they have in the past, because we have a record of that. But the problem is that might not be the case. And one of the famous things about Mount St. Helens is that when it erupted in 1980, we had a long record of deposits from previous eruptions of Mount St. Helens, and it did its normal volcano thing where it erupted. Things went up, and ash and volcanic material spread. The difference in the 1980 eruption is that it was coupled with an earthquake. The destabilized part of the internal structure of Mount St. Helens because it was already overpressurized with magma. And so instead of erupting normal, a volcano going up...
It was shaking the soda can before opening it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so instead of erupting like a normal
almost
volcano...
Literally,
almost literally, yeah. It literally, like the shock through it just destabilized the pressure. And so at that point you have...
Hey, Joe, you ever put dry ice in a plastic bottle and screw the top on and then throw it?
It's not a great idea, but no, I haven't.
You should do it.
It's fun.
I've done Mentos and Diet Coke.
Yeah, that's a good one, too.
Yes, it's pretty close.
Similar.
Yeah, so what happened with St. Helens is that...
I didn't say throw it at somebody.
Just into the wall.
Okay.
I mean, that's what I did, but it's not what I'm saying. So we got...
Not recommended.
Sometimes we got bored when the food shipments arrived at the pool I used to work at as a lifeguard.
If you're going to make a dry ice Molotov cocktail, you might as well throw it at somebody.
Yeah. And Jacob was there.
There you go.
We were both lifeguards at that pool, so sometimes...
That's why he has no hair.
It's not like he wouldn't throw one back. It's not like it wasn't a two-way street.
Right.
All right, so Abe, it sounds like you've mostly answered his questions. Do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, the last thing I was going to mention about Mount St. Helens is that it erupted sideways, which is not something we had to observe anywhere else. And so the point of that is that they're still unpredictable. Something different could happen. And so our best guess is going to be to say, hey, we can't predict it. We can't say ahead of time what's going to happen. But what we can tell you is that if it does erupt or when it erupts, if it erupts in the way that it has in the past, here are the options. And so then we can go back to our scenario with earthquakes and say, all right, if that happens, here's how we can prepare to minimize loss of property and life. So that's the big picture and the simple answer to, we just don't know. We might not be ever able to predict, but we can prepare for what we know is potential.
Sweet. Joe, what do you got for us?
I have a tweet from Kat MacDonald on Twitter. I guess it's tweet, so it's on Twitter. Anyway, Kate wrote us in to say, apropos of nothing, I'm going to plug In Defense of Plants, Science Sort of, and Titanium Physics, because I found science podcasts to be immensely helpful for just getting through the day, and those are the ones I listen to most often. She follows up with, it's easy to start feeling like everything is small and futile and mean-spirited, and it helps to be reminded of how large and interesting the world actually is. So thanks, Kate. Glad we can help you see the world as a big, interesting place rather than just a bunch of people throwing rocks at each other.
Or
throwing bottles full of dry ice at each other.
Full of dry ice, yes. Dry ice Molotov cocktails.
So yes, Kate, lovely sentiment. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. I said recently on the show that I think it takes a ratio of about 20 positive comments to one negative comment to even out my emotional well-being. So, things like this go a long way, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I will also say that in working with Joe, I have put the entire backlog of Technically Speaking up on SoundCloud. So if you run out of science shows to listen to from the list there, go check out Technically Speaking Pod on SoundCloud. And I'm working on getting the other Braculate Media shows, so Asterium, Collapse Wave Function, and Weekly Wienersmith up on the SoundCloud page as well. And they might already be up or in part up by the time this episode comes out. So go check out our SoundCloud page. I know it's like whenever you have a tweet that goes viral, you're supposed to say, hey, check out my SoundCloud page. So we haven't had that happen yet, but go check out our SoundCloud page.
There it is.
And then for the listeners who aren't Kate is an illustrator, and you can go check out her website at kmacdonaldart.com. And I hope, because we haven't had a good one in a while, we haven't had a new one in a while, I'm gonna put in a request for a Braculope.
Yeah. I need a Braculope.
Because I was looking at Kate's profile photo, and it's this really sweet octopus, and I was like, oh man, if she drew this, that's awesome. And then I found out that not only does she draw that, she draws all kinds of stuff. She's an artiste. So go support art, people.
It's cool when people are talented.
It is cool when people are talented.
Yeah.
We should try it sometime.
I encourage her to draw Braculopes.
Well, she did do a comic strip called Ratman versus the Mutant Fungus, which I am definitely going to
Me too.
read the second I have the opportunity to, because that sounds delightful.
It does.
Well, Joe, thanks for finding that tweet.
Yeah, you're welcome. I found it online on the internet.
Good job.
Well, I think that about wraps it up, and this was our final AGU episode, so we have no more AGU content for you, the listener.
But that was a great run.
I hope so.
Yeah. Don't you agree, Joe?
Yes. Lots of good content. Good job being press, Abe and Ryan.
I was just there to support.
Thanks, Joe.
Literally, as the bottom half of the trench coat.
Who's there for backup?
Abe's the one on top talking to people with holding the microphone. You're just the legs in this.
It's just holding the cable for the microphone.
Fraud.
Yes, and thank you everyone at the AGU press office, Lauren and Nancy and Shane and all those folks. Olivia, I couldn't cover the meeting as well as I would like to without your help, so I appreciate that. Lauren even helped me figure out what I was going to wear for my Story Collider event because I was not sure which shirt I was going to put with which jacket. It was a whole thing, but together we made it happen. So thank you everyone at AGU for making the meeting possible for me to cover. And with that, we're going to get back to our regularly scheduled programming. I can't tell you exactly what it will be, but I can tell you it would have a whole lot more science.
Sort of.
Julie, yell sort of.
Bevy too.
Visit sciencesortof.com for show notes, links to all the stories we talked about, and ways to interact with the hosts, guests, and other listeners. Science Sort of is brought to you by the Brachiolobe Media Network of podcasts, with audio engineering by Tim Dobbs of the Encyclopedia Brunch podcast. That's all for this week. See you next time on Science Sort of.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again to the Scripps trAinGU team for taking the time to sit down with us and tell us about their awesome plight.
Did you say plight?
Yeah, plight.
That's what I heard.
Is it a plight? Plight's a bad thing.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, plight's bad.
Plight's like
the awesome goal of. Well, now I bleep that.
Their awesome initiative.
Let me start all over.
Okay.
All right.
Got that recorded forever, Joe.
So many regrets.
Are we recording? Joe, are you recording? Send us that file.
Nope. Oh, shoot, my recording equipment all crashed.